In this video, I'll share with you my top tips and tricks when it comes to using ChatGPT as a programmer. Recently, I've been using this tool a lot more. It's been extremely helpful, and I figured out what it's good at and what it's not so good at, and I want to share that information with you. After going through this video, you'll hopefully learn about one new thing that you can use ChatGPT for that will save you time when you're writing code. So with that said, let's get into the first tip. Alright, so I'm going to share with you tip number 1, but I want to give you a quick disclaimer that even though ChatGPT is very good at generating code, a lot of the times the solutions it will give you do contain bugs or don't do exactly what you asked for. So make sure that you're still thinking about the code, you're not just blindly copying. Like anything, you should fully understand what's going on in the solution being provided to you by GPT, and you want to make sure you kind of question it and audit whatever it's giving you. With that said, if you want to get better at programming so you're able to do that, then make sure you check out my course, Programming Expert, from the link in the description. At the time of filming this, there's a sale going on. And if you want, you can also check out Blockchain Expert, which is for Web3 development if you're interested in that at all. Regardless, let's go back here and have a look at tip number 1. So the first thing that ChatGPT is very good at is generating code snippets and templates. I know that this is pretty obvious, but whenever you want something that's very easy to describe, you want a discrete function, you want something that's kind of a small independent piece of code, definitely use ChatGPT to do that. And whenever you're looking for some kind of template that maybe you want to fill in, that kind of gives you the starting block or the starting aspect of the code, again, GPT is very good at that. So I have a few prompts that I'm going to copy in here just so you can see kind of the power of this tool. So first of all, I am using GPT-4. That's because I do pay for ChatGPT just so I have access to that. And the first thing I'll ask it is to create a Python class for a binary search tree with methods for insertion, search, and in-order traversal. I think we all understand it's going to be able to do this, so let me come back once it's finished with the code. All right, so it just wrapped up here, and you can see that now I do have a functioning version of a binary search tree in Python. Again, before I copy this into my production code base, I would actually make sure that this is valid. I would go through and kind of test this. I might even ask ChatGPT to do a read of the code and actually audit it itself. That's something that I'll do quite often. I'll just message to it and say, hey, can you read through this and make sure there are no mistakes? I'm not going to actually give it this prompt, but that's kind of something that I might ask it. Anyways, let's do a few other snippets just so you get an idea here. Let me paste in this one. So this is write a JavaScript function to debounce API calls so that it only invokes the API after the user stops typing for a specific duration. Okay, so it was able to successfully give this to me. You can read through what debouncing is if you don't know what that is and kind of see the code output here. And then again, you would want to make sure that this code is valid. Now, in terms of a more advanced example, I have a prompt that's kind of more custom here. So I said, give me the template for a set of unit tests that will run against a Firebase Node.js cloud function using the Firebase admin package and TypeScript. This template should allow me to easily swap out the function that I'm testing and stub the different unit test hooks with Jest. So I gave it all of the technologies that I'm using. I specified exactly what I want, which is a template for testing Firebase cloud functions. And now if I run this, it'll give that to me. So this would save me quite a bit of Googling, quite a bit of actually kind of writing this out and stubbing it, and now I'll have a template that I can use for every single one of my Firebase function tests. So this is actually an example of something I did a few weeks ago when I was writing some in-depth tests for my Firebase functions, because I'm working on an app right now that does use this, and you can see it kind of gives me all of the steps. So before I go to Stack Overflow, before I go read the documentation, I'd probably just come to ChatGPT, ask it exactly what I want, and as long as I'm kind of happy with the answer and I know relatively what it's doing, then I'm probably going to use the output and put that into my code base. So let's give this a second to finish writing. Okay, so there we go. It gave me kind of the stub here that I was looking for, or the template. Now this can also be really good for generating documentation, where a lot of the stuff that it's typing related to this code, I might actually dump that in a README file just so that any more junior developers or people that I'm bringing onto a team can actually read through that and see exactly why I have the template set up as I do. Now, the last thing that I'll show you is that ChatGPT is very good when it comes to actually mocking data. So a lot of times I want to generate maybe 100 entries or 200 entries of kind of some fake data. So I'll ask ChatGPT to do that. It will either give me the generative code or it will actually give me what the entries are. So in this case, I can say, hey, I want to generate some fake car data. Each car should be a JS object and contain a make, model, and year. If we can type this correctly. Can you give me 100 entries, please, in a JS array? Okay, let's see if it can do that for me. Okay, so you can see that it's actually giving me kind of the generative code. So it's saying that I can use this faker library to generate the data for me. I don't want that, so I'm going to stop this. And I just asked it, I don't want you to use a library, just give me what the output of that code will be. And then it should actually just give me all of the entries, which is kind of what I'm looking for. So let's see this. Okay, so you can see that it's now actually spitting out the car data that I was looking for. If I wanted all of the 100 entries, then I could just ask it, hey, I actually want 100 entries, keep going, and then it would give that to me. Or again, I can use that kind of generative approach that it was telling me. All right, so that is tip number 1. Let's move on to tip number 2. All right, so the next thing that ChatGPT is pretty good at is debugging and finding errors in your code. I've used it quite a bit, and I'm actually going to show you a real example of when I used ChatGPT to debug some production code. So I was working on a Firebase function that essentially is going to return different data related to your workout history. If you guys don't know, I'm working for a tech startup right now where we're building a sports-related app. I won't go too far into kind of how that works. Anyways, all the code you see here is actually real production code. I'm leaking this to you. It doesn't really matter if you see this one function. Anyways, what's going to happen here is we are going to look through the user's kind of history of workouts, and we're going to determine if they were currently in the progress of a workout or not. So you can pause the video and kind of read through this if you want. I'll slowly scroll if you're interested in the context here. Essentially, though, this code has 2 bugs. Now, the bugs have to do with the way that we're actually grabbing the date here, and then we're not waiting for all of our promises to be resolved before we're returning this data, which means that we're not going to get the data we're looking for. We're going to get an unresolved promise. So what I'm going to do is copy all of this code. I'm going to paste it into ChatGPT, and I'm going to tell it to debug it. But before I do that, I need to essentially give it some information on what the code should do. So let me write that out and then we'll test this. Okay, so I just told it that I'm having an issue with the code above. It should be returning the user's workout module history with a key indicating if the user is currently in progress of completing a workout. Not the best English, but that's fine. Can you fix this? And then let's give it a second here to find the bugs. All right, so there you go. It gave me the new version of the code and actually tells me all of the errors that it found here and how it corrected them. Pretty useful. I don't think that this error here, number 2, is actually an error, so it might have been a mistake there when it was correcting my code. So again, I would go through and make sure that it's correct, but it did fix the 2 ones that I was talking about, where here it now added, if I can find it, this get date, which is required to actually get the day of the month, and then it added the await keyword for the promise.all. Now I know that this was fairly straightforward, but there still is like quite a bit of code here, and it's not super trivial, and it was able to find those bugs. Now continuing, the next tip that I have for ChatGPT is to use it to refactor and optimize your code. So in this case, some of you might be cringing at how messy the code is, you might not like how I wrote it. Don't worry, we can use ChatGPT to fix that. So what I'm going to do is just paste in this prompt, can you now refactor the same code and make it clearer and easier to understand, so that any of you that are whining about it will no longer be whining. So let's see what it gives us now, if it's going to kind of refactor the code. I use this feature a ton because I sometimes just write some garbage code or I just quickly get something down. Then I go, oh, I don't need to worry about refactoring it. ChatGPT can do that. Obviously, sometimes that comes with issues, but most of the time, if it's not a massive amount of code, it refactors it pretty well, and sometimes it will even automatically optimize the code. Now, you also can ask it, hey, I want this to be faster, I want this to run quicker, whatever, and if there's a way to do that, ChatGPT can typically figure that out and tell you actually what the problem is or how to fix that. So let's see what it gives us here. All right, so there you go. It gave me the new code here. Now, I'm not going to read through all of this and confirm that it is working, but we can see that we separated these logic into some smaller functions, and now we're defining exactly what's going on with each of these individual functions, which will make the code cleaner. It even performed the correct typing here, for the function, where it was indicating what promises are being returned, which is something I typically don't do because it's implied by TypeScript, and then it comes down here and tells us exactly what it did. All right, now let's move on to the next thing that ChatGPT is good at, which is actually telling you about best practices and kind of style guides for writing code. So I've just hopped over to Visual Studio Code, and I have a few examples that'll get ChatGPT to kind of audit and read through for us. So let's start with this Python one where we're calculating some tax and then we're calculating some insurance, and we're using kind of some similar code here, right? So since we're using some similar code, if I pass this to ChatGPT and I say, hey, can you read through this code and make it better, please? And then I paste this in. It should actually give me a new version now that's going to be refactored to remove the duplication. Okay, so there you go. It spat that out for us. It says that it is now removing the code duplication by adding a helper function. So the helper function is right here. And now for our tax and our insurance, we can use the same helper function. Perfect. Don't need to get too much more into that. Let's look at another example here from VS Code. So I have a React one. So you can see that I'm using this kind of, class-based component, not functional component, which is not really recommended anymore in React. So now if I do the same thing and I paste this in, hey, can you refactor this code and make it adhere to best practices, ? Let's see what it gives us. All right, so there you go. It now gave us a functional component, which is what I was expecting. This is kind of better practice now for React code. Now, I had another example, but I won't go through that because I think this kind of states the point. You can use ChatGPT to essentially read through your code and tell you if you're doing something in the correct way or not, or to give you suggestions for how you could adhere to best practices. Now, a lot of times this will be subjective, and maybe you actually think that ChatGPT is giving you code that doesn't adhere to best practices. Obviously, that's why you still need to have some programming knowledge to be able to use tools like this, but the idea is that it can kind of point you in the right direction, and especially if you're more of a beginner, start feeding it a lot of your code and kind of asking it to roast your code. If you do that, you're going to learn quite a bit very quickly, and you'll see how you can write better code in the future based on the code that's being spit out to you by this AI. All right, so for the next tip, you can use ChatGPT to help you do system design or implement different design patterns. So ChatGPT obviously knows about a lot of the main design patterns, and if you're trying to implement some kind of complicated system, oftentimes it's a good place to start to learn about different implementation approaches and to get an idea for how you might go about architecting a larger system. So what I'm showing you right here is actually the chat log of something I did a few days ago when I was designing a live feed system for the mobile app that I was working on. Now, I already had a general sense of what I wanted to do and some of the technical limitations, also like scalability, cost, etc., but I wanted to hear ChatGPT's opinion before I made a decision. So you can read through this. I'll quickly go through it. So I'm about to provide you with a lot of technical details for a project that I'm in charge of coding and architecting. Feel free to use technical jargon. I'm an expert level programmer and systems engineer and will be able to understand you. My team and I are working on a mobile app that uses React Native and relies on Firebase Cloud Functions and Firestore database. The feature we are building needs to be scalable and cost-effective, working for millions of users. We are attempting to build a live feed that updates in real time as events are logged. The feed will consist of the following types of posts: advertisements, user-generated workout log. Each user in the app should have a unique feed based upon the following: their geographical location, the users that they follow. Each user has a list of users they are following. Okay, the feed should load extremely quickly and the users should be able to scroll through the feed while it loads additional entries. Can you please start by providing a high-level overview of how I can go about building this system? All logic for building the feed per user should be handled server-side by a Firebase Cloud function. Okay, so now it goes through, I'm not going to read all of this, and it tells me exactly what I need to do. So first, it gives me some information about the data structure. It tells me how I should be storing different elements in Firebase. Then it's talking about the geolocation, real-time updates, so use the Firebase real-time listener, which is already what I was planning on doing. Feed aggregation, this is the main thing that I was focusing on. How am I actually going to build the feed such that it's very fast and scalable? And it kind of goes through and gives me an idea of how to go about doing that. Again, pause the video if you want to read through this. Pagination, another good point. As the user is scrolling through the feed, I want to be loading additional feed entries, and I don't want my startup load time to be very fast. So that's why I would need something like pagination so I can grab additional entries from the feed. Then we have caching and performance optimization, so caching data on the client side as well as on the server side based on how we're doing the feed aggregation. And then advertisements, it's saying schedule a cloud function to periodically insert advertisements into the user's feed based on their geographical location. Now, I realized that the way it was telling me to do the feed aggregation here in point 4 wasn't exactly what I was looking for, and it wasn't super scalable. So I said, okay, can you please elaborate on point number 4? How will this handle generating a feed that contains workout logs from users that a specific user is following? Is this a scalable solution? Won't this become very expensive over time with the increase in users? And that's because for every single user, it was generating a unique document that contained that user's feed. And at first glance to me, that didn't seem very scalable. Now, it turns out that is actually one of the better approaches to go with, but I didn't really know that, and that's why I was asking ChatGPT to kind of explain this more in depth and give me the reason why I should go with this approach. So really, I'm kind of treating this like a colleague of mine where we're going back and forth on different system design kind of architectures and debating between each other what is going to be the best. I'm asking it questions just like I would ask someone that I'm interviewing, hey, why do you think this is the best? Why are we doing it this way? Or like I would ask anyone else on an engineering team. So I won't go through the rest of this. You guys can read through it if you want. It is kind of an interesting topic in terms of how you do live feed aggregation. Not the most trivial or easiest thing in the world, hence why I was using a tool like ChatGPT. So with that said, I think I'm going to wrap up the video here. I wanted to show you how I'm using ChatGPT and how this is saving me a ton of time and genuinely making me a better programmer. I hope that you guys got some value from this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next one.